Everything returned with the sound of the pencil. Just enough to write a line, that slight, imprecise click of lead pressing ahead. Once more, I discovered it tucked behind the third shelf in biographies. It was fractured along the barrel, the eraser was worn down to the metal, and there was a faded piece of masking tape wrapped around the middle, as if someone had attempted to hold it together, but had given up in the middle. I had no idea why I had retained it. Perhaps because it made me think of myself. As I turned the corner back toward the circulation desk, I thumbed the old tape, tucked it into the side pocket of my cardigan, and inhaled deeply. The day was meant to be good. A day that is clean. After 3 months of planning a collaboration with the Neighborhood Senior Center and 3 pilot sessions that were attended by all participants, I had just finished writing the final report for the Community Digital Literacy Project. I felt worn out in a productive sense, as if I had truly created something significant. I didn't first give it much thought when Mrs. Holbrook said, "Eli Tran to admin, please," over the overhead speaker. Perhaps a straightforward update regarding the branch newsletter or a meeting rescheduling. Usually it went like that. However, something changed as I entered the rear office door and discovered Margaret seated there already, with her legs crossed, a latte in hand, and a costume reminiscent of someone trying out for a sitcom with a librarian theme. Holbrook responded, "Come in, Eli," without raising her eyes from her tablet. Her voice sounded too sharp to be warm with a polished edge. As soon as I entered, Margaret grinned, a smile that is controlled and appropriate for a pageant. I gave a courteous nod and took a seat. A long pause ensued. Holbrook finally put down her tablet and folded her hands together, saying, "We wanted to talk to you about the initiative. To be honest, the digital literacy pilot has garnered more attention than we anticipated. In this year's regional report, the board hopes to draw attention to it." I gave a nod. "That's fantastic news." "Yes," she uttered, elaborating. "For this reason, we have chosen to give Margaret official program credit and media contact." I blinked. "I apologize, Margaret." "Yes," Holbrook went on, her face not moving an inch. "She's done a great job communicating with the public, and the board finds her youthful voice appealing. We believe she will be a more effective spokesperson for the program going ahead." I turned to Margaret a little. Her fingers were clasped tightly around her cup, but her smile remained. "I understand," I murmured slowly, shoving the words through my constricted throat. "Just to be clear, Margaret is going to get the program that I created from the ground up, found volunteers for, submitted the grant application for, and oversaw each session of OW. Yes, she is the official representative," Holbrook said. "However, your contributions are undoubtedly valued. We'll see to it that your name appears in the internal records. Internal records. That is hidden in a PDF appendix that no one would ever read. And the review of the promotion I asked knowing already." Holbrook let out a sigh. "We are delaying all advancement discussions until the following quarter due to some budget reallocation." I had viewed the budgetary records. I had, even though I wasn't meant to. Last week they placed a $1,800 order for a smart espresso machine and ergonomic chairs for the worker lounge. I replied, "Understood," but I really meant something else. Margaret got up when I did, either out of habit, guilt, or both. I didn't wait to be dismissed by Holbrook. She stated, "I hope you'll show grace during this transition. Eli, right before I left, we appreciate you being here. Existence. Not working, not in charge, not possession, simply being there. Similar to background sounds. Similar to a coat hanger or filing cabinet." I gave one nod. "Obviously." I passed the community bulletin board and the broken tile by the copier that no one ever bothered to fix as I made my way back to the front desk. One of the seniors from my workshop, Alma, had just sat down with a stack of crossword puzzle books and her reading glasses past the table. I took out the pencil and sat down carefully on my creaking rolling chair behind the desk. I clicked it once. It continued to function. left a mark anyway. I refrained from crying. Nothing was thrown by me. I did not scowl at all. Rather, I took out a blank notebook, opened it to the first page, and wrote the following 4 words at the top. I won't be erased. I stayed after closing that afternoon. Nobody questioned it when I explained that it was to complete catalog reconciliation. In reality, though, I was downloading all of the source data for my digital literacy curriculum in a quiet, collected manner. Decks for presentations, sign-in documents, outlines for volunteer training, revision history in Google Docs. Even the initial grant proposal, which I had jotted down during a lunch break in the margins of my own diary before anyone was interested. I made a backup of everything on 2 drives. I put one in my locker. I took the other one home, due to the fact that I was visible. They were going to keep that in mind. I didn't resist. Not because I didn't care, nor because I was weak. However, I was aware of how this place operated. Over the course of her nearly 10 years as branch manager, Halbrook had perfected the art of professional deflection. She didn't shout. Nothing was ever written down. She simply grinned as she transferred the burden of other people's labor to more practical hands. Margaret's kind of hands. Tidy, well-groomed, and linked. I lowered my head. Margaret's image began to show up in local newsletters. Despite not having taught a single solo, she was leading the rollout of our senior IT literacy course. At board meetings, she distributed glossy flyers she had produced chirping about the importance of digital inclusion for seniors who were excluded. I was aware since 6 months prior, I had used those precise phrases in my draft proposal. None of it had been altered by her. Not even the typeface. It didn't matter, I told myself at first. That recognition was secondary, and that the effort was still benefiting people. However, the longer I remained silent, the more I felt like I was vanishing into my own world. I continued to arrive first thing every morning when the fluorescent lights flickered to life and the coffee maker hissed. Still resolving printer issues, teaching interns how to alphabetize without omitting MC names, and guiding anxious seniors through the process of sending emails to their grandchildren. When the Wi-Fi went out, it was still the one that people called for. When the intercom malfunctioned, no one else knew what to say when someone in the reading nook started crying. Officially, though, I was just Eli. No title. Not a word. Only Eli. I heard Margaret conversing with a trustee in the conference room one afternoon. Our walls were paper thin, so I wasn't listening in, but the words still hurt. "Oh, Eli," she remarked, chuckling softly. "He has always been here. Incredibly trustworthy. He excels in technical things. Technical matters." A 32-page curriculum that complied with national digital literacy criteria was prepared by me. However, yes, we'll refer to it as tech stuff. I stayed late again that evening. I pushed the outreach supply bins back to storage after the others had left, ran the past due reports, and sat by myself with the same broken pencil under the flickering track lights. Really, it was ridiculous, this delicate item that I was unable to discard. There was no clip on it, no hold. If you applied too much pressure, it left faint, irregular lines. However, it continued to write. I may have preserved it for that reason, because it would not die in peace. I did the same. I began recording everything. I kept it a secret. I recently made a record of work private cloud folder and uploaded the following files to it. Initial versions of each workshop, plan history of revisions from the shared drive screenshots of the calendar invites, with my host designation email chains that identify me as the person verifying collaborations, images from the pilot sessions, showing me distributing printed surveys, arranging chairs, and modifying projectors in a subsequent blog post. Margaret referred to the music I had created for the intergenerational tech class as her idea to foster a sense of digital nostalgia. Retaliation wasn't the point. Not quite yet. It had to do with memory, because I was aware that the narrative was already being changed and that no one else would maintain the truth if I didn't. The shift was hardly noted by the workforce. When they wanted someone calmed down or something mended, they still came to me. At times, Margaret would even stop by my desk and whisper, "Hey, how did you deal with that RSVP problem for the volunteer night?" Again, I always responded, not because I was fond of her. However, I was aware that she was inexperienced. She had a knack for packing, but not constructing them. Additionally, I was preparing step-by-step instructions in both Spanish and English, and scrubbing sticky fingerprints off the donated tablets while she practiced talking points for the upcoming gala. People recalled that. Not every one of them, but enough. Alma was one of them. Small, keen-eyed, and wearing a scarf around her wrist like a bracelet, she came in every Tuesday and Thursday after her physical therapy sessions. I informed her every week that I wasn't a professor, but she still called me Professor Elias. Real to me, she would respond grinning and rubbing her temple with one hand. Alma held one up and peered at the new flyers that featured Margaret's face prominently. "She's a teacher now?" she inquired. I paused. "That kind of thing," Alma stated bluntly. "She's never taught me anything." She then used the flyer as a bookmark after folding it. I kept it to myself, but I said nothing. Later that evening, I made a backup of the backup drive on my laptop by opening a new tab. Version 3 full timeline is the label. Because I was secretly getting ready. I had no idea how or when it was happening, but something inside of me was changing. Not to engage in combat, but to be prepared when the truth demanded evidence. And the pencil was still in my cardigan pocket when I reached inside after shutting down the laptop. Broken still. Mine yet. The topic line was where the change started. Regional digital literacy highlight feature opportunity. It was obscured by a dozen standard emails concerning printer maintenance and volunteer arrangements. Thinking it wasn't for me, I nearly erased it. However, I was drawn to the sender's name, Annika Torres State Library Board Communications Director. I made a click. The communication was brief, courteous, and not explicitly targeted to me. They had copied me. Margaret was the target of the major message. "Hello, Margaret. We can't wait to highlight your digital literacy initiative in our upcoming spring newsletter. Would you kindly confirm that you are available for a quick interview and send along any supporting documentation that demonstrates your curriculum structure community effect or pilot session photos?" My face was emptied of blood. The text was read 3 times by me. Supporting documentation, framework of the curriculum, pictures from your pilots, mine. All of those items belonged to me. I reclined in my chair and gazed at the screen. The room took on a sickly tint as the fluorescent light overhead flickered. A child was yelling about past due penalties somewhere close to the front desk, but it sounded like faraway static. Margaret had remained silent. "No warning. The state board is not mentioned. Thank you, but no. No. Hey, I used your interview template. Nothing but quiet. The quiet that takes your place." I accessed the cloud disk that was shared. We stored software assets on the official library disk, not the private one I had been constructing. The folder with the title DLI Outreach Drafts was there. The identical volunteer roster I created from scratch is within. My curriculum guides along with the precise headings for each section. Since we lacked the funds for premium accounts, I created the slide presentation using free Canva designs. Word for word my notes in the presenter view. The author had changed only now. Maria R. created it. She hadn't even made any changes to them. Simply reposted under her name after being copied. My typos were still present in the docs. My hands started shaking, but not out of anger, but rather the calm, controlled hatred that comes from knowing that someone looked you in the eye, smiled, and then used a few keystrokes to obliterate you. I began downloading. Each and every file, each timestamp. I was still able to access all the revision logs. I went back and did more than just save the current versions. Looked over the history of versions. Monitored when a file was copied. Took screenshots of my time zone's initials and metadata. On my external disk, I made a new folder and gave it the following name, Layered Proof. I then started typing after opening a document, a chronology, docs, screenshot notes, or date event file. When I created the initial pitch for the pilot program, I filled in all the details I could recall. Margaret followed me throughout the senior center that day. She started burying me the moment I taught her how to use the file management system. 2 hours had gone by the time I looked up. I had finished my lunch break. Margaret was giggling too loudly in the hallway, volunteers were unpacking donated books, and children were shouting at each other over stuffed dinosaurs as the library was once again packed. I maintained my composure. I remained undetectable. However, my folder was getting bigger, and my quiet was beginning to matter. I sent an email to Alicia Mercado, Regional Director of Community Outreach, whom I hadn't spoken to in a long time that evening. During one of my early pilot sessions, she had pulled me aside to comment on the flow. "You constructed this yourself?" she had inquired. I had given a nod. She grinned. "Well," she had added, "don't flinch when the right people are finally watching." I would always remember that. I then wrote one line and attached a zip file. "I believe that the right people are currently watching." 3 hours later, she responded, "I see everything. Can we discuss this tomorrow silently?" After staring at the response, I put my laptop down. I still had the mechanical pencil in my pocket. I made one click. The lead became slightly jammed, then made progress. It continued to function. 5 blocks from the library, I met Alicia the following day at a small diner at a quiet corner table. She looked exactly like someone who didn't want to be identified with a scarf tucked into the collar of her coat. She didn't waste time making small talk. "I've looked over the documents. No question exists. You did this." Unconfident in my ability to talk, I nodded. "Would you like me to go up against them?" she inquired. I gave a head shake. "Not just yet." Her eyes narrowed. "So, what would you like?" I stopped. My hand trembled a little as I put down the fork. I stated, "I want the truth to stand on its own." It was indisputable not because I yelled it. Alicia gave a nod. "We will then ensure that the truth is too loud to be disregarded." She reached across the table before we left. "Eli," she said, "I've encountered similar individuals in the past. They mistake charisma for credibility. However, charisma wanes. Documentation doesn't." That afternoon, with my hands in my pockets and the mechanical pencil pressed against my palm, like a small reminder of my identity fragile, perhaps I made my way back to the library. But long-lasting. I waited after that. Silently. The falsehood would begin to crumble for a minute. The downtown municipal center, a glass-walled, echo-prone structure that seemed to have been created by someone who detested introverts, was the venue for the gala. This year, I hadn't intended to go. I was rarely one of the few delegates that our branch sent, which was the norm. However, Alicia asked me straight out this time. She said, "I want you to be there." Obviously in silence. I dressed in slacks that were a little tight, pressed my shirt, and boarded the 7:15 bus while carrying a mechanical pencil and a USB disk in my coat pocket. Margaret was already there when I entered. She was standing close to the refreshment table, drinking a glass of white wine, talking to 2 members of the regional board, and laughing a little too loudly. She had printed business cards and styled her hair in a pearl clip. She gave one to the event photographer as I witnessed. She failed to see me. Or perhaps she did, but decided against it. I listened while sipping flat ginger ale at the periphery of the crowd. A few said hi and nodded courteously. They had heard of our innovative senior tech curriculum, according to 1 or 2. Without correcting them, I grinned. Alicia then took her place at the podium. She spoke in a clear, collected, and cautious tone. Tonight, we're honored to showcase a program that exemplifies the goal of digital equity, bridging the divide between generations' language barriers and technology, and those who feel left behind by it. I saw Margaret getting ready by squaring her shoulders. This was a practice time for her. She tilted her chin and adjusted her top, and I could see it. She believed that Alicia was going to give her the mic. However, Alicia continued to talk. Before we continue, she continued, I would like to thank someone who quietly laid the groundwork for the Connect and Click program from the very beginning. The idea, curriculum, the outreach structure, the pilot's performance, everything. Margaret stopped, her fingers clenched around the stem of the wine glass. She cocked her head slightly, her breathing gone, but her smile intact. Across the room, Alicia's gaze met mine. She said, Eli Tran Riverview Branch, will you take the stage with us? It didn't feel like a victory. It was horrible. It seemed like each stride up the aisle took longer than the one before it. My throat was too constricted to swallow. Yet, I could hear my heartbeat behind my ears. Alicia gave me a framed certificate as soon as I got to the stage. This is yours, she whispered, leaning in. It cannot be taken back. The cheering wasn't loud. There was no drama. However, it was genuine, and I felt seen for the first time in months. Margaret came up to me in the hallway by the coat check after the ceremony. Her heels clattered on the floor like charges. She didn't appear irate. She appeared to be shaken. You knew, she said, crossing her arms. You were gathering everything. I looked her in the eyes. Everything was built by me. She didn't dispute it. To be sure, no one else was listening. She glanced around. Are you aware of your actions? I gave a nod. I was honest. She laughed a little bitterly. You caught me off guard. No, I quietly said. I simply didn't recoil. She remained quiet for a while. Then, now what do you wish to be the center of attention, serve as the face? I gave a head shake. I'd rather not be in the spotlight. I would like the record to be correct. That's all. She didn't answer. However, she opened her mouth as if to dispute. She turned and left after that. I never again saw her in public after that. Halbrook summoned me to her office 2 days later. She avoided making eye contact with me. She stated, We have learned that Margaret will not be coming back after her allotted PTO. I gave one nod. Her resignation has been submitted effective immediately. I remained silent. I allowed the quiet to descend. Halbrook cleared her throat. I am aware that you were involved in this. At last, I turned to face her. No, I replied. She was involved in this. I simply quit acting as though she didn't. Halbrook remained silent. But after that, something changed. Employees began approaching me once more, not only when they needed something addressed, but also in an open manner. Minutes from meetings I hadn't even been to included my name. I started receiving direct CCs from trustees and planning emails. I didn't rejoice. I didn't make any posts. I didn't deliver any remarks. I simply continued to work. However, many took note this time. On a Thursday morning, Alma came with tamales wrapped in wax paper and silently delivered them to me. Only a nod. Professor Elias. You continue to teach, she remarked, even when the pupils are unaware that they are learning. Grinning, I took the mechanical pencil out of my pocket and placed it on my desk. That little thing still going? She asked after glancing at it. Remains a writer, I said. Like you? She replied without pausing. Alicia sent me the actual article draft a week later, the one that would appear in the bulletin of the State Library. The byline said, Eli Tran, Programming Technician, Riverview Branch, designed and executed the program. No changes, no replacements, no erasing. In the picture, I was seated at a table with 3 elderly people demonstrating how to operate a touchscreen. Alma was smiling but hazy in the background. After printing the document, I placed it in the folder I had already designated Proof Layered. I then crossed the label out and composed a fresh one. Acquired. I made no request for a promotion. I thanked Alicia when she contacted me weeks later to offer me the position of regional lead for digital services, but I declined. Not because I wasn't interested in the position. However, I didn't want to climb another political and visibility-based ladder. I wanted something that I could physically mold, something that didn't need consent, so I requested a transfer instead. The Northern District had a little unused branch that was in danger of closing due to a lack of funding. During a virtual staff roundtable, I had learned about it. It was a little building sandwiched between a payday lending office and a dilapidated laundromat. It has been 4 years since they last updated their website. And I went there. Not a banner, not even a welcome committee, only a reference desk with a broken drawer and a ring of rust surrounding the break room sink. It was flawless. I didn't do anything public throughout my first month there. Simply listening, observing, making notes. Every Friday, a grandma I met would come and print out the bus schedules. I met a 50-year-old man who couldn't look me in the eye, but mumbled "thank you" each time I assisted him in applying for a job online. And I met a teenage lad who kept borrowing the same 3 novels because the characters sounded like someone he knew. They weren't ostentatious customers. However, they arrived. I did the same. Yes, it was worn out, but it wasn't broken. Simply forgotten. Like me, sort of. I began modestly. The Wi-Fi range of the library has been updated. Instructed the employees on the use of shared calendars. To prevent the tax from falling out, the community board was fixed. Inquired if any seniors at a nearby high school required service hours. They did. I was the one who trained them. Word got out. Not going viral. Not quickly. But steady as water flows through stone fissures. Within 6 months, we had a working digital lab, a small but reliable bilingual tech help program, and a Tuesday night coding class for beginners led by Shireen, a 17-year-old girl who, until I told her, had never considered herself to be good at expressing things. After teaching a woman in her 70s how to use Google Maps one afternoon, Shireen declared, "I think I want to study education in college." I grinned. "You got started already." I was invited to speak at the State Literacy and Equity Conference a year after I transferred. I was first going to say no. Microphones didn't appeal to me. Or lighting. Or rooms full of people who ignored the folks actually working. But suddenly, I had a memory. I had 5 attendees at my very first workshop. Halfway through, 2 departed. 1 dozed off. I continued to teach it as if it were important. Since it did, I therefore composed the speech. Not for cheers. However, I wanted someone to hear what I had once needed, to hear someone sitting in the 3rd row perhaps, or watching the live stream from a solitary small branch in a forgotten town. Shouting is not necessary to make an impression. Being the spine of something doesn't need you to be its face. The most impactful work can occasionally be found in the quiet places in the additional 10 minutes you devote, or in the person you show up for even when no one else is around. The work that endures is that. I stopped. I then raised the pencil. It's still cracked. It's still on tape. I discovered this on my former branch's floor. The majority of people would have discarded it. However, it continued to write. Still, it made an impression. I thus preserved it. I turned to face the room. Additionally, you might be that pencil. You may have had more taped back togethers than you can remember. You're still writing, though. There was no loud applause when I left the stage. After that, however, scores of people with weary eyes and worn badges, came up and said things like, "That felt like me. I only needed that." I went back to my calm branch at home, my bookcases, my customers. The best part was getting back to normal. Not celebrity, not fire. Just do the job, honesty, goal. I discovered a letter in my inbox one Thursday morning. Margaret sent it. Eli. I don't anticipate a response. However, I wanted to express my gratitude, not after what transpired, but for your handling of it, what I didn't notice before I now see. Additionally, I'm working to improve. I hope all is okay with you. M. I didn't reply in writing. Not because I was upset. However, she was no longer in the chapter I was in. I discovered it again when organizing a drawer years later, long after the job title had become irrelevant, and the certificates had started to gather dust. The pencil. I nearly grinned. I'm still here. In its own way, still entire. I scooped it up and slid it into the pocket of my shirt after twirling it between my fingers. As he passed, a frightened new intern tried to pass for someone he knew. I gave him the training schedule for the day. Does that thing even work? He questioned taking it and looking at the pencil. I made the click, a tidy click, a new lead. It does, I said, especially when it counts. He gave me a nod as if he didn't understand. But he would one day, because it had nothing to do with a pencil. It has to do with being there, a presence that didn't yell. It was never required. That simply remained silent and shifted the room. Similar to me. My credit was stolen. My name was removed. They attempted to portray me as interchangeable. However, I retained the documents. I remained composed. Silently, I spoke the truth and waited. I now lead from behind the scenes rather than in the spotlight. My work is important. My presence is important. I also didn't break. I composed, and I remained.